Hey everyone, this is Professor Lucien, and I'm going to review two papers out of the 8 for this week. I could have done more, but I think the rest of these should go fairly quickly. You should be able to go through them in not too much time. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and bring over the PDFs. One thing is sometimes the PDF copy is in a different angle. And I just want to make sure you know that all you have to do is click on View and Rotate View in order to make it proper. You probably already knew that, but I wanted to bring it up. So let's first go through The Balance Theory by Mike Smith and Pascal Sainfort, now Pascal Carrion. This is a great paper. This is a foundational, seminal work that I use for a lot of the things I practice today, and it provides a really great literature review, and it refers to some things we already covered and some things that we haven't. So it's designed to recommend an interactive model or a work system model that takes into account a wide variety of work design or job design, social psychological theories, to address the stress, and it's both physical and psychological stress, and we'll get into that. So let's get into the review. So they already talk about scientific management and Taylor, if you remember that from week 1. And they point out that some things are good, and they talk about where the incentive system came from. Henry Gantt, 1919. I wonder if he's related to Ron Gantt with the Safety Differently movement. That would be interesting. But what they do is they basically, get into the negative issues of it. That here it talks about something from 1955. Designers have to minimize immediate costs by minimizing skills and de-emphasizing job satisfaction. And so what's the difference? The difference is Taylor was really focused on designing a job to be more productive, making it hyper simple, so you had to have really no training whatsoever, just an incentive. What they're trying to say is that, and what the science, how it changed over time, is that workers want to be satisfied. There are other needs they have, and so now we get into the human relations movement. Because we do have an educated workforce, and they have concerns that go beyond just money now. See, it says workers are no longer thought to be machines, and that's the way a lot of you described scientific management, and that they also want to be a member of a group or belong. And so that's we're social animals. We want to be part of something bigger. And so they start getting into discussing Maslow's hierarchy. You probably heard of that. You took psych. McGregor's work as well. And they talk about it from the perspective of what do people want, how do they get it, and how it can be there's some individuality to it, but there are also some general terms as far as how a work setting may affect the motivational and emotional and motivational, responses. Okay, and depending how connected they are to the work. It talks about participation, building off of what Lawler had we read last week, to get people motivated, excited, and to perform more work. So it talks a little bit about ego there. Job enrichment, which was a Hertzberg model or theory. Extrinsic factors could affect worker dissatisfaction. Intrinsic factors influence satisfaction. So satisfaction, dissatisfaction, according to Hertzberg, is not on the same continuum. Two very different things, which agrees with some of the things that I've done in my research, that somebody can absolutely hate management but love their job. It seems like a little bit counterintuitive, but so there are things, so they don't think they're getting paid enough. They're dissatisfied with the management, but they love the work they do. They get a lot of personal value from it, and so they're satisfied with their job. Hackman Oldman had another model. Ability of a person to make a psychological connection with the job, defined by the influence of the job on the person. And he gets into different aspects of it, different characteristics, and things like skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. These are all things that affect the psychological state of the individual. And we want these things. If we have workers who find meaning in their work, take personal responsibility, take pride, and they get intrinsic value from the results, they're going to be a higher performer. Talks about perception. We'll talk about socio-technical systems, I believe, next week. Yeah. No, not this week. The following week, and that's Passmore. That's Trist, and we'll get into that later. But it's studying more of a group design, almost unmanaged, in which people work together with the technology they're given in order to produce more than they would individually. It's pretty cool. It's a neat theory. Social democracy, right away. It was studied in the more democratic socialist countries, so I kind of skipped over a lot of that. Though there are certain things that would relate to more of the sociologically benefits of a particular good design. So job design and stress starts talking about that. And they're more relating it to things being either undefined, too difficult, not expectory, so therefore people are stressed out by it. And that psychological stress can convert into physiological stress. And so they talk about that. They have more job stress theories. Selye, I had a whole class built around Selye's book. So perceived inability to meet a perceived demand is considered psychological stress. How do you alleviate that? Well, Bob Karastek's model says that socialization does that. So let me give you an example. So you're stressed out about a paper you have to write for a class. For example, that's because you feel like you don't have the ability to write it, or maybe you don't really understand what the professor wants. Well, that can be resolved two ways. One, talking to the professor to get a clear indication of what is expected. And second, speak to your classmates about how they're dealing with it. And you'll find out that you're all kind of in the same boat and, just got to go ahead and do it. And so that should reduce your psychological stress. And what they're basically saying is when animals are put under high stressful situations, it's very unhealthy to them because of the way the body responds to stresses. PE fit theory, there's some good things and bad things there. As far as, do your capabilities, do your desires match the job? And, I'm not sure about that one. I'm not as influenced by that one. Let's see. Getting more into workplace theories. It talks about different types of stressors that are on people, and it's getting a little bit more modern with it. We're in the 70s now. And then they introduce what they propose as the work system model and what it's supposed to do. And the idea is you have 5 elements, and it's the organization, the environment, the task, the technology, and then the person. And they're all those factors are constantly interacting with each other. And if there's ever a point where the individual is overstressed to compensate for a misfit or a discrepancy, that tends to put them in a position of either high stress or high potential for error or injury. And that's why I always try to look past the worker when I do an accident investigation. It's because they are being influenced by the work system itself. So as a manager or as a designer, I should be able to look at these other factors and realize that maybe they, slide out of tolerance or something under certain conditions, and therefore there's an additional, chance for either exposure or severe injury. So here's the basic picture of it, and all these things are interacting, all affecting the person. But the person can enact some influence into these things as well, depending on what sort of autonomy they're given, what the job design allows them to do. So then they describe all the different factors. The organization is an interesting one. I always seem to focus on that one. And so they, it's just like what you would think. It's sort of management's influence, based partially on design. And now we're getting towards the end. And what it really comes down to is this is not a definitive, it's not an end-all be-all law of the world, but the viewpoint puts us in a position to better understand the oddities or the variances that affect how people interact with their work, with others at work, and how that affects both them psychologically and their ability to perform their job. So that's pretty cool. That's what I like about this this paper, is that it gives a great review, a lot of support. Difficult to test this, but it gives you a lot to think about. I like that. So let's move on to James' reasons, chapter 1 from his Human Error book. And this is complex. I'd actually had to read some of this multiple times. He gives decent examples, just like when we read Peterson last week. He gives interesting examples to some of the points he's making. But what he's trying to do is provide a classification for what error is. And actually, after reading this again, I did add some of this to my lecture that I'm giving this week. So he refers to something from the early 1900s. Knowledge and error flow from the same mental sources. Only success can tell one from the other. So what Mach is basically saying, what Reason's referring to, is that somebody does something with an intent for a particular outcome, but it doesn't happen. But it's the same approach. It's the same intent. So therefore, what could contribute to the error beyond intent? Because we typically blame a person for an error. Oh, it's your fault. You did it intentionally. But no, what he's saying is it tends to look the same. I like that. He talks about there being a sort of a balance between what is expected versus what is real. Talks a little bit about errors. He's talking about taxonomy, whether it's, you've got equal variance or you've got small variance, but it's off target. And he talks a little bit about that. So it's variable and constant errors. And intention. So, okay, this is probably the most important part. If I was to say, really focus on something here beyond all this other stuff, it's that he's broken it down, sort of the taxonomy for errors, into 3 questions. Were the actions directed by some prior intention? So the problem is sometimes people get hurt because it's novel to them, it's new to them, it's different. Something's different about it. And so what they did is they applied different experiences to it, expecting the same outcome, but some characteristic was too different, and therefore it didn't work. Did the actions proceed as planned? So that's sort of in the delivery of it. Did they follow each step, or was there a critical or fatal error? And I don't mean fatal as in death, I mean fatal as in doesn't work. And then did they achieve their desired end? So if you messed up and still received your desired end, that's called fail-safe. Even though you failed, the bad thing didn't happen. And that's something that Todd Coughlin talks about in his design approach to safety. The intention comprises 2 elements: an expression of the end state to be attained, an indication of the means by which it is to be achieved. Now, doesn't that sound awfully like Lawler's description of organizational culture? A shared opinion of what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. I don't know. I think there's commonality there. And then here's another thing that I would, if I was you, copy and paste into my notes: the algorithm for distinguishing the varieties in intentional behavior. Was there a prior intention to act? No. Well, see, you can see how we kind of lays it all out. Involuntary, non-intentional, spontaneous, subsidiary action, unintentional action, slip or lapse, unintentional but mistaken action, or successful action. Do you see that? It's a bit oversimplified, but it gives you a basic idea of, from an intent perspective, how things can go awry or not. An error results in something that's undesired. Let's see. It comes up the idea of intentional versus non-intentional. I think it's represented there in that figure a little bit better than having to read it all. He gives some interesting examples, gets into criminology. Let's see. What does he say here? That error will be taken as a generic term to encompass all those occasions in which a planned sequence of mental and physical activities fails to achieve its intended outcome, and when these failures cannot be attributed to the intervention of some chance agency. So it wasn't purely by chance. Something that was completely unseen. A lot of people believe that 100% of accidents are preventable. I don't feel that way, because there is some chance, and we aren't 100% all-seeing, okay? There are things that our human senses limit us from perceiving and therefore considering, and therefore actions result in undesired outcomes. It talks about slips and lapses, talks about mistakes. I don't expect you to memorize those. What I'm giving you is, what I want you to take away from this is that human errors occur. And when they occur, we should not place the blame solely on the worker. We should look beyond them. And that's why I chose the work system model, that we would look beyond the individual, excuse me, the individual's capabilities to find out what could have led to it. And if we were to pluck that person out of the accident investigation and pluck in another one, would they have made the same assumptions? Would they have had the same perceptions? Would they have potentially committed the same behavioral actions that ultimately led to a failure, whether it's an accident, a near miss, an injury, equipment damage, whatever it might have been, the unintended or the undesired outcome? I hope that was clear on that. He's got the classifications of errors, and he kind of went off on a wave here. So he's got behavioral classifications, contextual level classifications, and it seems like it's a famous thing, conceptual level of classification, conceptual level of contextual. So it's contextual, then it's conceptual. Okay, confuse myself. And he gets into between error types and error forms. There's failures of expertise, lack of expertise, rule base or knowledge base levels. I don't want you guys to get lost in the weeds here. I want you to be focused on the different potential sources of human error. And if we can identify that and redesign work or redesign training or redesign feedback from supervisor to worker, then hopefully we can mitigate these sources of error in our workplace. So it talks about the methods for investigating human error. Now, this one almost reads more like an epidemiological study, corpus gathering. Having people keep diaries sounds very much like that. Questionnaire studies, he says that there's some issues with that because of interpretation. Lab studies are very difficult because they are so controlled. And then he gets into simulator studies, gets into computer design stuff. Case study is where we want to spend most of the time, because a case study is what you do when you do an accident investigation. It is an investigation confined to your workplace. That's the scope. So inevitably there are problems. The primary sources of data are accident reports. Not only are these mostly concerned with attributing blame, they also tell a story that may be inaccurate or incomplete, even when the reports are prepared by experienced or relatively open-minded investigators. That's a really important paragraph, and what I really want to be thinking about, because if we're going to be talking about quality management and controls next week, and if we're going to talk about safety metrics, and those metrics tend to be heavily reliant on accident investigations or accident investigation reports, he's pointing out that, this is the error guy, that a lot of error goes into it, even though it's not intended. And I'm going to bring up some terms in lecture that kind of help define what those are. And then, well, we're already at the summary here, that humans are going to make errors. Workers are going to make errors. You almost have to expect it. But how do we prevent it? And that is taking a systems approach. When accidents occur, we have to look beyond the worker, look for more of a root cause. What put the person in the mindset or the expectation of what they were planning to do resulted in a undesired outcome, or in the actions that they had to perform, did it deviate from expectation, and did that lead to an undesired outcome? But mostly you have to, what he didn't talk about is building a trusting relationship with workers so that you can uncover these things. Because if they don't trust you, they're not going to share with you, and you'll never really get to that root cause. So I'm still under 20 minutes, which is good. I wanted to keep each under 10. So that's a really quick summary. What I want you to do is just take what I had just said. And for the reason one, it's very easy. I think I pointed out certain things that were super important, and I kind of did that for the Smith and Sainfort as well. So kind of put that in your own words for the summary, because you still have to turn that in every week to make sure that you've watched this or read these. So otherwise, let me know if you have questions. It'd be great to see you on the discussion board. Thanks.